Peace exists. It's not just a concept that the world might discover one day. Peace has existed throughout history. Peace exists now. Peace is all around us. It's everywhere, except where it's not. And perhaps even then, peace is there too, waiting to be remembered, waiting for us to return to it. More and more, the world is awakening to the fact that the way that we live on this planet needs to change. For millennia, we've tried to make things better and fix problems we see in the world around us. Yet the cycle of conflict continues. What if we've been looking everywhere, but that one place the answers we need are always found? Perhaps our first step towards lasting change and peace outside ourselves is to begin by looking within, even when it's not easy to do so. When peace is found here, our thoughts and actions naturally begin to ripple out to our family, our community, and beyond. Many people don't believe that world peace is possible because of what they see out there in the world. But maybe peace worldwide starts on the inside.
I think we all, at the very core of our being, all human beings, all 7 billion of us, are yearning for peace. We work towards creating a safe haven that we call our home, that we try to, build in a place that is safe, that is quiet, that is gives me the freedom to be able to be myself. And so I think at the core of every human being is a yearning for peace.
Well, it's obvious the world is going through increasing stress and chaos. And that's affecting every single person on the planet. It's affecting everyone in several ways. One is people are connected now, most people, even very poor people, are connected through their cell phones and their internet. So people are really understanding more what's going on and through media throughout the world. And that creates a lot of stress because mostly what the media reports is stressful. And not about all the positive changes, but about all the problems.
It's really unfortunate that most of our history books are really books about war, often about an elite fighting for more land or conquering more people, expanding beyond their boundaries. We don't get to hear about peoples who coexisted peacefully, sometimes for thousands of years. There is documentation if we look for it. We can find stories of indigenous peoples who maintained very peaceful coexistence for many, many generations. But it's also quite an interesting thing that to write about peace, there isn't so much to say. There is something structural about divisiveness and fighting that leads to more words, more reports.
I think it's very clear when we listen to the news and we hear our leaders. I think the political, the economic, the environmental, there is the social structures that are crumbling.
And this can be very destabilizing at times. It can spark creativity at times. And since we're all experiencing this, we need to learn how to manage those energies. And if we don't, then it increases stress, it increases anxiety. We wake up in turbulence and don't know where it's coming from. All of that is actually an opportunity and a gift, because when people don't know where else to go, they go to their heart. And so more and more people are looking deeper within. They're saying there's got to be some other answers. There's got to be some place to go. There's got to be some solutions.
If an individual wants to achieve inner peace, there are many different modalities and technologies to help them control their thoughts and beliefs and consciousness in doing that. But personally, I believe there's a fundamental need first for finding love for oneself?
When there is no inner practice, when there is no self-knowledge, when there is no self-love, it's virtually impossible to feel deep love and compassion for others.
If you can't love yourself, then by definition, you can't really love anybody else, and nobody can love you for a simple reason. If someone says they love you and you in your mind are saying, I'm not lovable, then right away you will dismiss anybody who says that they love you because you can't love yourself.
I know that when I'm not feeling peaceful inside, then I'm much more reactive and much more prone to lashing out. No matter how hard I try to control myself, I'm going to, in one way or another, it might take a very subtle form, but I'm going to be lashing out and hurting people if I myself am hurting.
I think pain is here to tell us that something needs to change. And from my experience, I've seen that most people, I can't say all, but most people that I've spoken to in the last 15 years that I've been on the path, have found their spiritual practice because of some sort of a painful experience.
أنا جيت من أرض كان صار فيها نكبة لأهلي، كان فيها مجزرة في طنطورة، وأبوي من أم الفحم، يعني انقتل أبوه وانقتل أخو ستة. أنا عشت الحرب بهاي الأرض، بس إحنا ما بنقدر نضلنا نفوت الكراهية ونفرط البغضاء بقلوبنا. أنا من واجبي إني أعيش بسلام. عن طريق الشغل اللي أنا بشتغله ممكن نعيش برؤية جديدة.
So inner peace isn't something that you can achieve by trying harder. When I look at myself and ask, why am I not at peace sometimes? It's usually because something hurts. There's something unresolved. It could be unresolved anger, unresolved grief. And until these things are healed, then my inner peace, and therefore the peace that I bring to the world, will only be temporary. And the unresolved pain will come out in some uncontrollable way.
We're here on this planet to each of us learn to love. Each of us learn how to self-empower, self-regulate our nervous systems, our minds, our emotions, so that we can connect with that inner peace within and be able to become more of who we really are. And that requires us learning how to maintain composure in challenging situations. So peace is a practice. It's an internal practice. Now, we're all here to learn that through our own growth processes.
Peace is something that is a fundamental part of ourselves. It's not something that we go find at a monastery or find at a beach in Hawaii.
People who have dived deeply into their inner world tend to find this, that the actual nature of our deeper consciousness has all these qualities just inherent to it. It has peace, it has love, has compassion, has strength, power. All these qualities, they're not really to be developed or attained, but they are our nature. So how I tend to relate to it is it's more a process of clearing away those things that are obscuring that reality. And that's where the process of purification comes in, of inquiring into the patterns that constitute our identity, how our psychology is sort of formed, our egoic identity, working through the wounds from the past. So, I think that the spiritual path tends to be a two-part process. There's the purification part, the working through our issues and all of that. And then there's the realization part, realizing our deeper nature, and that's more the path of meditation and those sorts of practices.
The practice, any kind of practice of meditation or prayer, brings us into that place within ourselves where something new can happen, where we can catch our breath, we can stop for a minute. And out of that place, we begin to see a new way. We see what's needed. We're less reactive. We are more loving.
As we take time daily to settle into that sense of peace and carry it with us into our daily life and circumstances, it begins to pull out of us great kindness and compassion, a deep sense of all's well, no matter if circumstances around us aren't well. And we carry that compassion, that deep sense of peace, that deep sense of well-being and kindness to whatever we do and with whomever we're with.
We can abide in that true nature of peace through practices like meditation, and then we do our ongoing work of clearing and healing and purifying that help us sustain that peace, us sustain that connection to our real nature, which is peace.
It's not something that, in a manner of speaking, we're doing. It's more who we've become. We are peace in action. We are compassion and kindness. It is aspects of our essential nature.
It is a fundamental part of ourselves, and meditation happens to be one of the ways to access that inner sanctuary. Now, having said that, I also believe that not everybody believes in meditation, or not everybody will find meditation as the best tool to go within and access that sanctuary. Yoga, Tai Chi, music, arts, crafts, conversations, there's all kinds of beautiful things that one can use as tools to get into that inner state that has been, we've been bestowed with.
هاي الشغل اللي احنا بنشتغله فيه يسموها تقارب القلوب. لما انا بفتح قلبي للطرف الاخر، الطرف الاسرائيلي، وبسمع وبحس برضه هو عاش الكارثه، برضه هو عاش الحربات، برضه هو عاش الالام زيي، يبقى في هون عندي رحمه بقلبي، وعن طريق هالرحمه انا ممكن اشتغل معاه وممكن نبني ارض السلام مع بعض.
Conflict, or the mentality of dominating and destroying the other, rests on the perception of one's enemies as others, or on a perception of being in a hostile universe, being a separate self in a hostile universe, where the forces of nature are arbitrary, and the best we can do is to control and dominate and insulate ourselves from these indifferent natural forces that don't care about us, or the hostile competitors out there. When you're immersed in that, then peace is irrational. It's naive, because you're just going to get taken advantage of by the ones out there who are not peaceful. So you better protect yourself. You better carve out your territory and defend it. That's baked into the cake of separation. And by the same token, when we understand that this external universe is intimately connected with our internal universe, then that whole mindset of war and conflict and opposition no longer makes sense.
This is something that human beings need to be reminded about. But our historians and a lot of our intellectuals look at traditional cultures like that and say, oh, those people haven't individuated enough. And I realized that individuation is never a problem. There is not a single child that's born out of its mother's womb that doesn't realize that it's separate from its mother. What we don't see so easily are the threads of interdependence. The underlying truth of interdependence, that's what we need reminding about. We do not need anyone to remind us of individualism or separation.
This transition that we're going through toward a world of peace isn't going to come by holding ourselves more tightly to some ethical or moral code. It comes through a transformation in our perception and in our experience of being. And when we perceive ourselves and experience ourselves as intimately connected, not only with other people, but with all beings and with the universe and with the events of our lives, then when conflict arises, instead of seeking to win, we seek to understand.
A peaceful community is a wonderful byproduct of having inner peace for a very important reason. If you are happy with yourself, if you can love yourself, that gives you the freedom to know other people at a different level and understand and appreciate them as well. How you interact with them when you're at peace with yourself is a much more peaceful interaction than if you are not really settled and stable where you are. As a result of this, when people start seeing each other in a glow of light, in a glow of love, what that really does is it changes our interactions. They are much more supportive, they're much more positive, and they're much more involved with creating health and harmony in the environment than what we're experiencing right now.
What has happened in the practices that I've been involved in, from a clinical and educational point of view, is that when you drop people beneath the limiting processes of personal identity, they get in touch with a much deeper, broader, more expansive sense of consciousness that allows an identity that you can call integrated to arise, where they still feel in touch with their body, still know their own individual history, can make sense of their life, have what's called a coherent narrative, but they also feel that their identity includes membership in a larger whole, so that's the connected part, and they find there's meaning within the process of what we would call integration.
In the world today, we can talk about activism in at least two different fundamental ways. One is the actual activism, where you go out in the street and you actually do something and become active to make change. But there's a new form called subtle activism, and subtle activism is the belief that through consciousness, through spirituality, through meditation, and through prayer, that we can make a change in the world.
What seems fairly uncontroversial is that engaging in those practices has a positive transformative effect on the participants themselves. They tend to be in touch with a significant increase in hope about the world, about their capacity to play a meaningful role. They connect with their deeper nature. They get filled up with those qualities. And so the weak version of the subtle activism hypothesis is that there's at least those people get transformed and uplifted, and there's a ripple out effect sort of through normal means with them, how they interact with their family and friends, what projects they're inspired to do, how it affects their own creativity, and that ripples out into the world. The strong version of the subtle activism hypothesis is the more radical idea that there could be something of a non-local effect.
In the internet age, we're faced with a new kind of phenomenon. We have the possibility now, and it happens almost on a daily basis, where a large percentage of the world's population can participate in an event happening at the same time somewhere on the earth.
But I think we're finally at a stage now that the technology can facilitate the coherence of people's consciousness around the planet in the orders of millions and tens of millions of people.
So other than a few times in recent history, we've never even had the capacity to do that. And so a natural question arises on what difference does it make? Well, we've already seen that it makes differences in a political realm. That if enough people start complaining about something, things can happen very quickly in politics. But what we've been interested in is whether or not there's something more subtle that is happening as a result of these moments of very high attention by hundreds of millions or even billions of people at the same time. One of the projects that we're doing to look at this idea is called the Global Consciousness Project. And this involves sensors that we have around the world in major countries. And we're looking for correlations between changes in what we might think of as the mass mind, all focusing on the same thing at the same time, in relationship to changes in the physical world.
I think that kind of event where known power centers are linked as hubs that allow for the participation of many other people online, let's say, that kind of event excites me and is very powerful because it's structured according to already existing powerful spiritual morphic fields, we might say, but also allowing for the participation of many more individuals and communities.
I worked for many years in Princeton's engineering school, doing what we called anomalies research. What we were investigating is whether consciousness is confined to your skull, or if it reaches out and touches the world, so to speak. And our answer to that question and similar ones was that yes, the mind or consciousness is absolutely not so constrained as we sometimes imagine.
Well, I can read your brain activity by putting wires on your head, and it's called electroencephalograph. I can also read your brain activity with a new device called magnetoencephalograph. What's very different about this is the probe to read your brain activity is not even touching your body, it's outside of your head. And I say, well, what's the relevance of that? And the answer is simply this. Your thoughts, your beliefs, your actions are not contained within your head, but they're broadcast into the field.
Among the things that we did in the laboratory was demonstrate that you could use electronic devices we call random number generators to capture some effects of consciousness. And we found that group consciousness will change the behavior of these random instruments. And that led rather directly to the question, well, what sort of group consciousness? And one of the kinds of things that works, so to speak, to change the behavior of these electronic random number generators is prayer, meditation, any kind of deep communion in a group. And the evidence is quite good that on average, those kinds of events that bring really large numbers of people together to think about global conscious influences on the way the future develops, that those kinds of events actually make a difference.
The most comprehensive scientific research that's been done to test that effect is the Maharishi effect. You know, I looked into that quite in depth when I wrote my book and wrote my dissertation. And my view at the end of looking at it in depth is that it does stand up to critical analysis. There's a lot of those studies that have been done, over 50, and more than 20 of them have been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, which is not easy to do. And they consistently show these highly statistically significant correlations.
So basically said, while meditators were in the practice of their meditation and bringing peace to the city, it actually changed the people in the city according to the statistics.
Crime rates go down, war intensity levels go down if it's near a war zone. Even things like car accidents seem to go down.
Unfortunately, when the meditators went home, the whole thing stopped. Point is very simple. If we live with that spiritual activism in our heart and use it every day, then this is not just an on and off event. This is a continuous process of shaping the environment and the community in which we live.
When we're studying what we call field consciousness effects, we're looking at the feeling of being in the zone that people sometimes talk about when they're in a sports team or in a chorus or something like that, where a group needs to work together to accomplish something. Every so often in a group of that type, you find people who say that something strange happened and they feel like the group gels into a single mind. And when that occurs, if it's a sports team, they do amazingly well. And if it's a chorus, people in the audience respond very differently. So there's a feeling state that goes along with these kinds of moments of connectedness.
One of my favorite examples of subtle activism is my experience at the Uplift festivals that we held in Australia. The first Australian event had about 1,500 to 2,000 participants. During the event, there was a moment where the community all got together and really sent their wishes and their prayers to the world to bring health and harmony to the outer world. But the most interesting aspect was after that experience where the whole group participated, there was a radical change within the group itself. That all of a sudden this group of diverse people that just joined together to come to the festival actually became a tight-knit community. the most exciting aspect of this whole thing was on the day the program ended, which was 10 o'clock at night, and everybody was supposed to leave, and they closed the building because it was a public building. All the participants went out into the parking lot, but nobody left. Nobody wanted to leave. They stayed there for 3 more hours in the parking lot, chanting and loving each other and talking about a future with hope and health in our world. And that was the most wonderful thing, seeing how quickly a group of individuals had come together and became so close and so tight, they didn't even want to leave the event. That was a real eye-opening thing for me to see.
When we come into alignment with each other and with our deepest heart of hearts and what we care about most passionately, not just for ourselves, but for our whole communities and for the earth, we align ourselves with something so much larger.
If we start sending out thoughts of healing and health and love and happiness, and it joins with many, many others that are having the same kinds of thoughts, then we actually amplify an energy field that can entangle with others that are not even having that thought.
It creates the opportunity for something new to happen.
And there is an invitation for all of us to co-create in action. But by doing so, we are able to live and be an embodiment of the creative, pragmatic, intelligent nature of emergence. So the joy, the magic of being living, this emerging beautiful flow of creativity is transformative and so beautiful for everyone who is part of that.
It seems to me that what we need is what I call big picture activism. It's the bigger picture that helps us see that, of course, that the inner and the outer are not separate, that the inner change accompanied by the structural change that promotes both inner and outer peace simultaneously. There are human scale structures and there are economic models now that show what happens when you start reconnecting people. Connection is the key word. And the connection is also starting with mind and heart and body, that reconnection in ourselves, which is really what the inner work is about.
They're completely inseparable. We don't have these boundaries between inner and outer, personal and collective. This is, I think, something interesting that we're exploring with this whole question of subtle activism.
The lack of peace in the world mirrors the lack of peace inside.
You know, many of us have been out there on the front lines as activists for many years. And what's actually changed? You know, it hasn't worked.
Over the last almost 40 years, what I've seen is huge changes in the activist movement. There was a time when activists looked down on meditation and felt that it was a waste of time or self-indulgent. It was seen as narcissistic. But there's been a huge shift now where people really are waking up to the fact that inner peace and outer peace are connected, that if you don't cultivate kindness to yourself, it's virtually impossible to feel kindness for others. If you don't cultivate inner peace, it's very hard to maintain peace in the outer world. So there is a real coming together now of people who previously might only have focused on inner work, who now realize that we need political and structural change, and very importantly, political activists who are developing a meditation practice and through that developing the endurance, the joy, the health that's needed to continue.
Sacred activism involves a conscious linking of one's efforts for social transformation, world peace, a linking of those efforts with one's relationship to the sacred or the holy.
So the cultivation of subtle activism should always be accompanied by sacred activism, by real action inspired by spiritual consciousness in the world. Otherwise, you'll be in the position of so many New Agers, imagining that just the vibrations of your warm heart can heal the horror of the planet. That's not true. The horror of the planet, the chaos in which we're living, the terrible injustices that so many people are burdened with can only be healed by a worldwide movement of love in action. And that worldwide movement, inspired by sacred activism, is our one best, last, most important hope at this moment.
We know that the stakes are so high in our own times that there will be a great temptation to push for the quickest, most forceful kind of change. And indeed we need that kind of change. But the great risk without a conscious relationship to the ideal of inner and indeed outer peace is that the change could spill over into violence and be much more unpredictable in its results.
You see this sort of acting out of extremely unpeaceful behaviors because that concept is not embraced.
If we want to be engaged in healing at this level, we have to recognize and understand that engaging in healing now and achieving healing here will also achieve a healing process around the world as well. As pain reflects throughout the world, healing also reflects throughout the world. If we begin to understand that we are all equal, we are all one as humans, and we begin to deal with these conflicts not in their isolation, but in their inclusivity as part of the global violence and conflict that we see, and our global desire to heal this body that is really dying of all of the violence and pain that it's suffering, then we begin to look at that future with new eyes, and we begin to look at that future where we see this global vision, where everyone in their identity is respected for who they are and is treated as equal and given equal opportunities like everyone else.
It's hard to know what to do from inside the system that has got us into this mess. So we're looking for a new story. We're looking for a new way of being. And maybe that new way of being is also a very old way of being.
There's also the cycle of time in history when there is this rise and fall. There is this time of what we define in physics as entropy. There are times when there is a natural state of peace, the natural state of utopia, and as time progresses, everything reaches a state of chaos, and we learned in physics about this thing called Brownian motion, when there's complete chaos and there's no energy left. And at that time, there has to be an external energy that needs to be brought into the system to recreate structure and order. And that's what we refer to as negantropy in physics. So in this cycle of time, I really feel that we are sitting at a point at the very bottom of the cycle where I think we've depleted all of our resources, and then the step comes to turn within. We've done enough of searching outside and trying to solve the problems from the external, and you can't solve the problems from the same mindset that first of all created it. So then what is the answer? The answer is then to turn within and change my mindset and maybe my perspective of how I view the world, and first of all how I view myself will give me a new ability, a new set of tools to be able to address the problems.
I believe that the secret meaning of this vast crisis is that it is destined to compel us to do deep inner work so that we can do radical outer work in the world. So though things may seem to be and are horrible on almost every level, that horror is prelude to what I believe is being born all over the world in hundreds of thousands and millions of people. What's being born all over the world is a tremendous no to the structures that are now imprisoning us, and a fragile but growing yes to the possibility of living in radical harmony with ourselves and with nature.
There's been a tendency in the spiritual movements to feel that we don't need to say no to anything, and that we don't need the external political work. I think we need clarity about steps that do take us further apart. We need to be clear about what to say no to and what to say yes to, always out of compassion, always from a space of peacefulness and kindness. But saying no to certain developments doesn't mean anger, doesn't mean violence. It simply means clarity.
Most important things that we all must understand at this moment is that there can be no peace in the world without justice for all human beings, all animals, and for nature herself. And you can't have justice without acting in a worldwide revolution of love in action on behalf of all creatures.
Inner peace, or practicing inner peace, because we're not expected to walk around with a book on our head to be in blissful peace all the time. We wouldn't learn and grow. Life is about challenges and how quickly we recoup, how quickly we reset back and learn from that. And then that adds to our soul's experience, and we become more aware, awake, more masterful people through that process. And so those challenges are opportunities. And as we develop that inner peace and that self-regulation capacity, we then have more maturity and ability to relate to others from that state. And as individuals come together or work with each other from more of that capacity to self-manage, then you're going to see flourishing communities that we haven't seen yet to date, because it hasn't been composed of people who are that self-managed.
There are many who argue that we are simply innately greedy and aggressive. I think anybody who holds a baby in their arms will realize that those little beings, those little human beings, long for love, for nurturing, for protection. If they get that love and care, generally they will turn into caring and loving people. The greed that we see today, the negativity we see today, is primarily from people who have not had the privilege of having those loving, nurturing relationships. As a human race, we wouldn't have survived if there hadn't been far more cooperation and care than competition.
Well, I think the historical record shows quite compellingly that our true nature is actually a contradictory or complex fabric with potentials for violence on the one hand and potential for compassion, love, self-sacrifice on the other. That's what the human being is. So it is really up to us and our will and what we choose to strive for, how we choose to live our lives, which of these elements will dominate.
So I feel for someone to really be an activist, socially engaged, politically engaged, environmentally engaged, it behooves them to really understand this deep inner peace. So to be able to work with outer circumstances to find peace in the world, I think is really dependent on the degree to which we found that inner peace within ourselves. Knowing inner peace, we may or may not be able to ultimately heal the outer circumstance, but we'll be bringing peace to all those who we work with in those circumstances. If we only are working with outer peace, at some level, there'll always be a sense of internal struggle and conflict that we're bringing to the situation.
My best case scenario is that the peace movement becomes like Gandhi's movement, like the movement of Lech Walesa in Solidarność, not simply a movement that cultivates inner peace, but cultivates inner peace so as to be more effective in the outer world. A peace movement that is dedicated to non-violent resistance, non-violent action on every level is a movement that can change the world.
I feel it is very possible. And it is all in the commitment that you make to make this happen. And it could start with a few hundred people. But it is at what level of commitment are these few hundred people committing their life to work for that global vision? There are many people who talk about it, many people who dream of it, many people who, millions of people who want to see it happen. It's a dream for many people, but it takes people moving from that dream to commitment to action.
أنا آمن إنه عملي عمل شاق، عمل طويل المدى، وثماره سوف تأتي لأجيالي. الأجيال ربما في نظري أحفادي وأحفاد أحفادي. إنه أنا ما بعمل لفترة اللي أنا عايش فيها، أنا بنظر لبعد 100 سنة 200 سنة. بعد 200 سنة أنا ما بكون موجودة، بس أنا زرعت شجرة السلام في هذه الأرض المباركة حتى يأكلوا أولادي وأولاد أولادي من بعدي.
We are all here, you understand? Because the way how we born, no color, no language, no names, we are all one. And we are one. Inshallah, God willing. Wassalamu alaikum.